Okay, I think as people are joining, we may as well start. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our event with Jasper Rees, who has written the authorised biography of Victoria Wood, much loved entertainer. Here's the book. Jasper will be in conversation tonight with Antonia Honeywell, author and great friend of the bookshop. A warm welcome to you both. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions, so if you send them via the Q&A box at the bottom, on the bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen, Antonia will put them to Jasper later on. So I know Antonia's got lots of questions and is raring to go. So without further ado, can I hand over to Antonia? Thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. It's a little bit strange sitting in my study talking to you all, but really glad to be here, and so grateful to you, Cheryl, for getting these events together, getting us back together, getting us talking about books again. Thank you so much. It's my absolute joy, pleasure and privilege to welcome Jasper Rees this evening. Hello Jasper.
Hello.
Jasper is an arts journalist, Jasper is an author, and he's written books of his own. Your books have been on Radio 4's Book of the Week. You've also written about Florence Foster Jenkins, who is a bit of a hero in many ways. But we're only interested in you tonight for one thing, I'm afraid, just one thing, and that is Victoria Wood. Victoria Wood's traditional greeting on the stage became, we made it, we're out of the house. Now we're not out of the house, but we have made it. We're talking to you, and as Cheryl says, we are talking to you about this wonderful book, the authorised biography. Jasper, tell us how it came to be you that wrote this. It had to be written, we needed it, we miss her terribly. How did it come to be your project?
I was a sort of jobbing arts journalist in the 1990s and had written a lot for broadsheet newspapers principally. I started to write for the Radio Times magazine in the late 90s as one of my kind of portfolio of outlets, and I was sent to write a feature about the second series of Dinner Ladies, and that was where I met Victoria. And indeed all of the cast, and Jeff Posner, who was the writer-director who had been so important for so much of her television career. And I wrote a piece in which she was obviously the main focus, but all of the other gang were in there as well. And she was, as you can imagine, she was an absolutely wonderful person to interview. I remember sitting, I went to a rehearsal, and I went to see one of the episode was recorded twice, as they all were, of Dinner Ladies, and I watched one of the episodes being recorded, and I think it was the one in which Victoria had to kiss Andrew Dunn at the end of the Christmas episode, and I interviewed her over lunch, and she was just, she was so not the Victoria Wood that I knew from the television screen. She was someone else, which was, profoundly fascinating for an interviewer. And I was lucky enough to be asked to interview her a lot over the next decade. So when the moment came for her literary executor to cast around for someone to write her authorised biography, I seemed to have been near the front of the queue. So she rang me up and asked me, and I said, how much of your arm do you want bitten off? And there were lots of other people who interviewed her, did brilliant interviews with her, and people who met her a lot, but I don't know, I was recommended. And I'm thrilled that it was me. And I think actually to sound a little bit, show the unattractive side of my personality, I would have been quite upset if it had been anyone else.
Well, I bet there were other people who were upset that it was you, but it was you, and you took it on. How did you start? How did you even start to get a handle on this extraordinary life?
Well, because it's the authorised biography, there's a huge amount of archive material. Victoria was, in the best sense, a hoarder. So she lots of her scripts and handwritten scripts, notebooks, scrapbooks, audio tapes, a huge amount of stuff was boxed up and archived. and was made available to me to look through. So I had that to call on. And then if you're writing the authorized biography, that gives you the opportunity to write to or call up anyone and say, this has the rubber stamp of the estate and Victoria's children, and it means that people will talk to you. So I interviewed a lot of people for this book, and I had a very tiny, I could count on the fingers of one hand the number of people who, for whatever reason, did not give me an interview. And it was quite nearly 200 people who did. So, and then once I interviewed Victoria's sister, Rosalind, she was my first interviewee, and she wonderfully said to me at the end of the conversation, she said, "Do you want to see her letters?" And so that was a new side to Victoria that I mean, as you can imagine, she was a brilliant letter writer, but the first evidence of that was in that jiffy bag that Rosalind gave to me, full of letters that she wrote to her from university and when she was living in Birmingham in the 1970s. And they're rich in information, but as with all of Victoria's letters that I came across, covering the next 40 years, letters, faxes, and emails, they were not able to tell me where she was, what her movements were, but also I was able to sort of determine what her mood was about whatever it was that she was working on at the time.
That must have been an extraordinary amount of material. You're talking about boxes, the boxes that were archived. And
yeah.
I mean, give it to us in roomfuls. How much material was there?
Well, the boxes. The box. There are. I think the number of boxes that came through my house was probably, I would say, about 25, and they weren't all full of documents. Some of them had tapes. Some of them had, a couple had photo albums, but there were 2 boxes just full of her business correspondence and faxes. And because obviously once she acquired a fax machine, she had to write the letter to stick in the machine, and she kept the letter. So for that, the fax period of her life was particularly rich in correspondence within the archive. And yeah, I mean, there was a lot to go through, and even right at the end, once I'd handed in the first draft, I was still rummaging through, and I found some stuff in one of the boxes which I hadn't somehow managed to come across before, which told me a huge amount about the very start of her stand-up career. So I had to very apologetically say to the publisher, is there any chance that I could fit in another 300 words in this particular page and make the book even longer? So yeah, I mean, and there's stuff that I haven't even finished reading. There were 2 boxes that was just Victoria's handwritten scripts for her live shows, which is just thousands and thousands and millions of words probably.
So you had all this material, you'd been trusted with this project, but one of the things, and I'm sure that everybody watching has their own relationship with Victoria Wood. I have a really strong feeling that if I met her, we would have been friends, like that Notting Hill thing, and we would have been friends. We'd have got on really well. This warmth and the generosity that came across on stage and in her scripts, this kind of love for life and human nature. How did you set out with a particular image of Victoria Wood when you began? And was that confirmed, or did it change as your research and your writing went ahead?
Well, I can tell you the thing that did change was that I had no notion really of how autobiographical her work was. I didn't know how much, apart from something like, I don't know, even if I say Pat and Margaret, which is her most autobiographical work, I don't think I knew how autobiographical it was. Yes, I'd seen the South Bank Show interview that she did quite soon after that, a couple of years after, in which she did talk about it. But I hadn't been aware until I started going through, finding out the facts of her life and the reality of her upbringing and her early years in showbiz, just how much she used that as a sort of, as a rich seam. So that I wasn't prepared for. I did already know that I wasn't going to be writing about the woman that people thought they knew, because I had been vouchsafed a glimpse behind that carapace, as you know, having interviewed her so many times, that I'd seen a different Victoria already, someone who was very serious, and I didn't particularly see the social awkwardness and the shyness, because in a professional context she was actually, you know, she was in an interviewing context, she was very professional. She knew that she had to do interviews, and she even gave me the impression that she quite liked them. She liked talking about her work and about her past. But the person that you're alluding to, I refer to in the book as a sort of a mirage that was, or an optical illusion conjured up with the help of an actual conjurer in the shape of her husband, Geoffrey Durham, who is better known as the Great Soprendo. So that woman, the woman that people thought that they knew, and I'm not saying that it was inauthentic and that there was anything fake about that charisma and that warmth, because there absolutely wasn't. You can't fake that level of, I don't know, this is a terrible word, but sort of huggability, that people did want to hug her when they met her in the street. And indeed, her personal assistant, Kathy Edis, told me that once when they were going around a market in Belgium, no, in Lille, that someone did run up to Victoria and hug her, which I think she would have found a bit of an affront. So I'm not saying that persona was a fake, but it wasn't the only Victoria. There were two Victorias. There was the private one and there was the public one. And there was the public one that you saw on the television and you paid to see on stage. And it was a different person who wrote all that stuff.
Your book it's a wonderful book, but it is in no sense an iconography. It's not a book of praise and wonderful. It's very insightful. You work really, really hard to show us where she came from, where she was going, and a kind of, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, a very steely core to her as a person. Did that surprise you?
Again, not particularly, because I had talked to actors over the years about working with Victoria, and they had sort of intimated that, you know, I remember Anne Reed said to me once, and I quoted this in the book, that Victoria had absolutely no bedside manner whatsoever. And indeed there have been, you know, the Dinner Ladies Diaries documentary talked about the way in which she policed her scripts to make damn sure that they were, and she told me about this herself, so I knew that side. But the steely inner core and the way in which she defended her work sort of does possibly connects back to her early years. She was the first woman doing any of this stuff, and she wasn't only the first woman, she was the first female stand-up to go on as herself, obviously, but she was the first man or woman to write her own sketch show and star in it. First Wood and Walters, and then As Seen on TV and all the Christmas shows. And she wrote these dramas, which she then early on, which she starred in as well, and then came the sitcom. She wrote, it was unheard of for someone to write the whole of their own sitcom and then star in it. So that's, all of that was unprecedented for a man or a woman. And she knew what worked, and she made damn sure that what she had written ended up on the screen. So yes, that was, you could call it steely. She was just the boss of her work, and she didn't want anyone else telling her what was funny. But in answer to your question, I don't stick her on a pedestal and not notice any of the flaws or the complications, as I would think of them. My background is in arts journalism, and I saw Victoria as an artist. I'm not a celebrity journalist. And I wanted to write the biography of an artist, not of a celeb.
And that, I think, is what distinguishes Let's Do It from the multitude of celebrity biographies and autobiographies that come out at this time of year. It's a real piece of scholarly research and exploration, and it takes you into her life and her personhood, like a novel sometimes, you know, in that creation of a character. It's an absolutely marvellous achievement, and it's a wonderful reading experience. It is thick, look, but it's long. It's long winter nights now. We're in lockdown. So.
It's if I can interrupt there, Antonia.
Yeah,
yes, it is thick, and I did worry about the length.
No.
And while writing it, because when I was the contract was being written, and my agent Jim said, "So how long do you want to? How long should we say it's going to be in the contract?" The previous books I'd written were, you know, the longest was about 100,000 words, and I thought, well, it's going to be longer than that. So I said to him, well, let's say 125 to 150. I can't tell you what that would have looked like in terms of pages. Probably, you know, sort of the higher end of the 300s. But then when I started researching, I just found out so much, and it was all just seemed to me to be integral to who she was. And, you know, once I found those letters, which were not part of the archive, but letters that people gave to me, they enriched the picture of her so much. And I was able to piece together like a jigsaw so much of you know, the progress of her journey through life, that I just didn't quite know what to leave out. And I did have a lunch with my publisher about a year in, and I said, look, it's going to be a little bit longer than what it is stipulated in the contract. And she said, what's in the contract? And I said, 150. And I said, it might be a bit longer than that. And she did slightly grimace. And then later that day, I was having a conversation, my second conversation with Julie Walters, and it was over the phone. And I mentioned this conversation, and she just said to me, she said, I think Victoria's fans are going to want to know everything. And I thought, well, I felt as if Julie was giving me permission to proceed. And I have to say that the publisher with whom I had the lunch, who's been absolutely wonderful, Anna Valentine at Orion Books, who was incredibly enthusiastic about you know, buying the rights to publish this book. She's been very supportive, and she did suggest that it come down in length a bit, and I did manage to cut out, I don't know, 4%. But after that, it wasn't quite 5%, but after that, I couldn't think of anything else to cut. And yes, it's fat, but the last 76 pages are index and notes and everything. So the actual text ends on page 506, he said desperately.
I'm talking about the length as a positive. I think it's
right.
Really satisfying to read something that doesn't leave you when you're interested, that takes you where you want to go, that fills in gaps. And I think it's easy when you're writing about someone who is as beloved as Victoria Wood is, to lose track of the talent in the writing, and your writing is marvellous. Very easy to read for a very long time. I meant that as a compliment and a strength of the book.
Thank you very much. Where do I send the check? It's very kind of you. No.
It's Cheryl will tell you, I only do interviews. I really want to do.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you should mention that, because when I was, you know, as an arts journalist, I don't want to bang on about my writing style too much, but I've written other books I've written sort of a couple of books which have a slightly more memoir-y elements to them, which are more of a kind of performance, in which clearly there was a need for me to insert myself into the narrative more. And with this book, I thought, I just pieced together the information I found in as sort of digestible way as I could manage. But I did think, look, you're writing a book about the greatest, as I refer to her in the book, the greatest entertainer of the television age. And there's no point in even thinking that you can compete with her or try and, sort of pull focus away from her. So I I'm not. I'm trying to keep myself out of it, to be honest. So, funnily enough, there were one or two reviews that I initially said, right, I'm not going to read any reviews. I'm going to avoid the reviews, and just like Victoria used to avoid her reviews, and I'm afraid I succumbed very, very quickly. And one or two people have very kindly suggested that I've somehow started to. I know there's one line when I talk about her taking the summer off to have a bunion operated on, and people find this line incredibly funny, and as sort of as if I've been invaded by the spirit of Victoria Wood. But if so, it's unconscious.
I suppose you spent such a lot of time with her, didn't you? Through not just the interviews, but like through the archives, being given access to letters that other people haven't been given access to.
I wouldn't presume to be able to ventriloquize or sort of sound like her at all. So this is a live stream talk, so we can't take that bit out. But anyway, everyone pretend I said any of that.
Time with her.
Yeah, I did indeed.
Your acknowledgements page, so when you finish the book, you read the rest. Your acknowledgements page reads like a veritable who's who of not just British comedy, but British theatre as well.
Yes.
It's incredible. Just everyone who is anyone in British theatre. Is there not in the obviously in the book, but in your acknowledgements? Did you find that people wanted to talk to you? Did they come to you? Did you have to? Was it like getting blood out of stone, or did you? No,
it wasn't like blooding. No one came to me. I did have a sort of pro forma letter that I wrote to everyone. And there were one or two people who needed to wait and see, and I think that was because they were maybe mistrusting of, not mistrusting, but were wary of my intentions. But then other people met me and said, no, it's all right, he's fine, he's harmless, and so. I mean, there was one friend of hers at Birmingham University, for example, who was a brilliant source. But she said to me, I wasn't sure whether I was going to talk to you, but Celia Imrie said you were okay, so I did talk to her. But no, I mean, there are a couple of people I wish I'd been able to talk to, and I never quite got to the bottom of why they wouldn't, and they would have added something. I'm not going to name names. But generally speaking, people did. Well, I can't. Sorry.
Nobody's listening, Jasper. Nobody's listening.
There's one missing name, which is pretty flipping obvious. But I'm not going to go there. But although that particular part of her career, I did interview a lot of people who were able to fill in the gap, so it didn't matter. But no, people were very happy to talk, not because it was me, but because it was her, obviously. And what often happened was we would start and have a conversation, and it was, it's very hard to have an hour-long conversation and say, right, you have 60 minutes to tell me everything that you know about Victoria Wood, and then that will be it. So some conversations would start either in person or over the phone, and they would continue on email, or there would be more conversations over the phone. And the longest conversation I had with anyone started in September. I started working on it in July 2018, and I met Jeffrey Durham in September 2018, and our conversation continued until after I'd sent in the first draft, because he was such a vital source for so much of the book. But there were others as well, obviously.
So tell us about the ones that you can name, the ones that you do feel comfortable.
I feel comfortable talking about all of them. But Jeffrey was extraordinary, because there was, as he said to me, I think I can help you. There is a 7-year period in Victoria's life when I am the only one who really knows what happened. So I went round to his house that day and took my iPad and started recording him while typing at the same time. And Jeffrey talked for 6 hours and I typed. And we repeated that 3 or 4 times. And he sent me thousands and thousands of words of email answers to all of my questions. And a lot of these things was just trying to say, Jeffrey, I'm trying to pin down what happened when, what happened. Did Victoria do this then, or would it have been later? So he was my kind of co-archaeologist. And what was wonderful, there are some people who had brilliant memories and who wanted to, for example, there was someone who shared a lot of letters with me from the 1970s who was at Victoria, at University with Victoria, called Robert Howie. And he was fantastic at being a sort of, Sherlock Holmes with me, trying to work out the order in which events happened in her time in Birmingham. And then there were some people like, Julie, bless her, Julie Walters, who was a wonderful interviewee and gave me just some fantastic quotations and information that I've not seen her say anywhere else to anyone else about Victoria. But she would be happy to admit that she's very sketchy on what happened when. So I couldn't go to Victoria for dates and times. Sorry, to Julie. And then there was the opportunity to interview Victoria's children, who were both very, very, Grace and Henry, who were very open to answering questions very frankly about what it was like to be brought up by her, what it was like to live with this celebrity mother, who obviously was not a celebrity to them, and what it was like to watch their parents separate and then divorce, and then her illnesses. They were both very frank with me about that, and brave, because it's can't have been easy to relive those terrible months at the end of Victoria's life.
Yes, and her motherhood was incredibly important to her comedy, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Knowing how tall her son was by where the level of the snot was on her trousers, and Grace and her E minor scales.
Yes, she was.
She used the family, and I think it's one of the reasons why people connect so strongly with her, because you're not usually allowed to make jokes about things like that. She was very open and funny, but quite acerbic about a lot of the experiences of womanhood and motherhood. So it's wonderful that her children did talk to you like that.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there was when by the time Victoria, who, as you rightly say, sort of wrote about what it is to live in the body of a woman. I, as a male consumer of her comedy, could only nod and take as read what she said. But she was able to talk to female audiences in a way that no comedian had ever done before. And when you listen back to the tapes of her performances, the pitch of the laughter is so different from the pitch of male comedians. And she's making jokes about the complicated instructions on the size of a Lillet packet, or things like that would make women absolutely scream with laughter. And Jeffrey had said that he used to wander around the auditorium of the stalls, checking up to see how it was going, and he would see the men just sitting there grumpily like this with their arms crossed, or looking accusingly at their wives or girlfriends, and while they were collapsing in hysterics. So by the time she described the journey of what it is to be a woman, all the way from puberty all the way to her hysterectomy. And her hysterectomy was the subject of her last live show in 2001, Victoria Wood at it again. And by that time, her children were aware that she was using family life as part of her act. But Henry was absolutely okay with it. And he said to me, I knew that she wasn't really talking about me. I knew that she was making stuff up. Grace felt a little bit more sensitive about it at that age, and she actually asked her. I remember Victoria that year when she was doing that tour. I interviewed her twice during that tour, and she said to me, my daughter said to me, please, can you not talk about me? I don't like it. So that contributed to Victoria's decision to give up doing live comedy. Obviously, the breakup of her marriage was the main contributing factor to her giving up stand-up and also wanting to go on to do other things. But sorry, this is a long-winded way of getting round to saying that the way in which she wrote gags about her family. It was a family, and yes, there was a husband and a wife, a father and a mother, and a daughter and a son, all, you know, and the daughter was older and the son was younger, and she did do jokes like saying that my son looks like something out of the Beano, but it was soft focus. It was only a kind of a vague overlap. She didn't really talk about what actually happened behind her front door, because she regarded that as not anyone else's business. And even at the end, when in that same show she talked about trying to sort of make things happen in a middle-aged couple's bedroom, with both of them suffering from various ailments, which is a very funny sort of loving section, which she sort of wrote for Jeffrey. Jeffrey very much felt that it wasn't about her or about them, and he was slightly perturbed actually when he was at the Albert Hall and saw all these people, their guests, laughing at it, and he was sitting at the back of the box thinking, "Oh my God, they think this is about our marriage, don't they?" And he absolutely knew that it wasn't.
It's that because she does come across in your book as a much more private person than one would expect. If, like me, you only know her from her performances, from her comedy, and what you're saying there absolutely rings very, very true. That it's a family. It's inspired, but not truly autobiographical in a totally literal sense. That makes perfect sense. Now, sorry.
Well, she imparted topspin to the facts of her life.
Such a nice word.
And obviously the central relationship and the thread running all the way through her writing in her plays and her sketches and her dramas was her relationship with her mother, which you know, I can bang on about that extensively. But so it wasn't the relationship, the theme of parental neglect that appears throughout her work from the very start is, I mean, it wasn't literally her mother, Helen Wood, but her feelings of neglect, which she had carried with her from her childhood, were, you know, very, so far as I could tell, very real. And Jeffrey certainly confirmed to me that she lived and breathed parental unavailability. So they never discussed what Pat and Margaret was about, because he said it seemed to him to be completely obvious that that's what she was writing about.
It's yeah, that's very powerful. The stuff about her mother at the beginning, well, and not just at the beginning, and it's although it's a shame that Grace did feel she didn't want to be spoken about on stage. It's rather wonderful that I find it rather wonderful that Victoria Wood listened to that in a way that she had never felt listened to by her own mother. That's
a lovely point. That hadn't occurred to me actually. But I mean more generally, Victoria was determined to be the mother that she had not. To give her children a kind of maternal love that she had not felt that she had been the beneficiary of herself.
She was working so hard at that point, wasn't she? She was very famous. She was achieving an awful lot, and she had a lot still to do. That tension must have been very, very real for her. Did you get?
Yeah, well, she was always working hard. Sorry, what's the question, Antonia? I interrupted you.
I hadn't got as far as framing the question. That was I'll just shove the insight at you, and you talk back to me.
Well, she was never not working hard, and I mean, there are many reasons why her marriage suffered the fates that it did, but one of them, I think, I was able to conclude by reading her correspondence at the time and talking to Jeffrey and talking to the children, was that, you know, her, and indeed talking to her in interviews at the time. She talked, I did the first interview with her after her marriage had broken up, and she talked about, you know, how she was a perfectionist, and she did push herself very hard. And in Dinner Ladies, which was an extremely demanding show to put together, even though she loved making it, was, you know, she would go into the studio every week and rehearse and then record it for 6 days, and then and sort of she would spend many nights staying up very, very late, or sometimes even all night, perfecting the script, and then be up in the morning to give the children breakfast and take them to school. And when I listened back to the audio tapes that she kept during the first series of Dinner Ladies, I mean, it's wonderful listening to it, because you hear kind of raw, unvarnished Victoria Wood talking to herself without any kind of filter, making herself laugh a lot, but also just yawning all the time with these deep sniffs. She's sniffing the whole time, and she's clearly absolutely exhausted. So that must have had a bearing on, I mean, as I discussed in some depth, and then she had a hysterectomy, and then she went out on an exhausting tour. And Jeffrey talked to me very frankly about the fact that they had always had rows. One of her very early dramas for Granada, written in the early 80s, called Happy Since I Met You, is about, Victoria wasn't in it, but it starred Julie and Duncan Preston, about a young couple who are rowing the whole time. And it was evident to me that she was drawing on life in her own home.
Yes, that, and in that, as you say, I'm trying to put in tidbits from the book rather than actually now. I'm aware that I am not on my own with you. We have a really lovely audience tonight, and I do have access, everybody, to the Q&A button. So although please don't feel obliged, because I have my pile of questions and will continue for as long as Jasper's willing to talk to me. But if you have any questions you would like to put to Jasper, or it would also be really lovely if you wanted to share any of your own memories and thoughts of what Victoria meant to you as a comic in your homes. As I say,
I'd love to hear those.
But it would be lovely to pay some tribute to Victoria Wood in that way. So I have access to the Q&A buttons. Please just tap. And if you want to talk to each other, there's a chat button whereby audience members can connect with each other. But the one I have control over here is the Q&A button. So yes, thoughts, anything you'd like to share, any particularly funny lines that stick with you, do share them with us. We'd both love to hear from you. Oh, there's one already. Having said this is my Q&A. Did you? So this is a question from Lauren. Lauren asks, did you find out about any projects that Victoria had got underway but not managed to finish before she died?
That's a very good question, Lauren, and the answer is yes.
Oh, speak on.
I mean, she did. There's a lot of unpublished stuff in her archive, as scripts that were, sketches that were discarded from As Seen on TV and other Christmas specials. And she wrote 2 dramas in 2008, which were never made. So those scripts were sitting there. And then the final thing she was working on right at the end of her life was she'd never managed to break into cinema. It was the one art form that she'd not conquered. And so she wrote a script which was going to be produced by Hilary Bevan Jones, who had been the producer of That Day We Sang, which was on BBC One at the end of 2014, and she wrote the script at the start of 2015. It's true to a great deal of Victoria's material over the years. It was another Mickey take of contemporary trends in television. A little bit of Bake Off was in there. She'd just done Celebrity Bake Off. There was stuff about steam trains, and it had a sort of Delia Smith type character at its heart, a very humorless woman. I'm not saying Delia Smith is humorless, but a humorless woman who becomes a breakout star of Sunday early evening television, and she wanted Julie to play it. It was going to be called Cakes on a Train, and it didn't happen. Who knows? One day maybe it will, but it's got lots of lovely stuff in it.
Oh, that's a shame we're not going to see that one. Let's hope it gets made at some point. Thank you very much for that, Lauren. Alison asks, would Victoria have liked to do more straight acting in other films than Housewife 49, with other people's scripts, maybe with someone else's scripts?
Alison, the answer to that is I don't think she would, actually. I mean, she did say, I don't know why, she was slightly baffled sometimes that people didn't offer her work, and they assumed that she only ever appeared in her own scripts. But actually, when she did get guest in other things, she didn't particularly enjoy it. She did, oh God, I've forgotten the name of the children's book that she was in 2007. Swish of the Curtain, is it? No.
No,
was it? No, it wasn't Swish. That was the book. That was her favourite book.
That was the one that she was fascinated by. Wasn't it? They ambushed her with a copy of it in her old house, didn't they? In her old bedroom, her childhood bedroom.
I've completely forgotten the name of the book that she. Sorry, I've had a total brain fade. But she was in a BBC drama, and she played a character called Nana, who looks after three young girls. Three orphan ballet shoes, exactly. Ballet shoes. How could I forget that?
Honestly, anyway, Jasper, we're as bad as each other. Come on, audience.
Yeah.
Step
Sorry,
up.
ballet. She didn't particularly enjoy doing ballet shoes, and no, she did it as a favour to her friend Piers Wenger, who had produced Housewife 49 and was the producer of this. But I just think she liked doing. Towards the end of her life, she did do the odd acting gig. And, you know, there were short little jobs on set for a few days, and she quite enjoyed them. But she was, towards the end of her life, she was much more interested in producing and acting. She didn't really want to be on screen so much. And there was her first ever feature, which was the only feature film that I can think of that she did, was a sort of a Toad movie made by Terry Jones, in which she had a small cameo, and she quite enjoyed doing that. Oh, and she was in a League of Gentlemen film and had a cameo. She quite liked those little cameos, but the answer is no, generally speaking, Alison. She was happy doing her own stuff.
Do you think that was because of what comes across very much as a theme in the book, is how much she liked to be in control of what was going on? Was it?
Yeah, totally.
Someone else's direction, do you think?
Right at the end of her life, her last job was a Sky thing, which she just did because she wanted to work with Timothy Spall, Fungus the Bogeyman. And I spoke to the director of that, but I looked at the correspondence of it, and she just thought it was quite chaotically organised. I think she personally likes the director, but you know, the script that was initially came in, she thought was rubbish. I mean, the original scriptwriter said to her as a read-through, he said, "It's great to be able to write gags when you know you're writing for someone who's going to make them land." And she privately thought, "Yeah, when am I going to get those gags?" And he was actually booted off the project, and the scripts were doctored. But so she found it a little bit stressful when she could see things that could be done better. She loved being a producer. I mean, she was basically a producer on Housewife 49. She's almost a director on Housewife 49. And she liked policing the set and making sure that they had the pullovers that people were wearing were period, were accurate for the period, and all that kind of thing. So she liked all that stuff. And her attitude tended to be, if you want something doing, it's best to do it yourself, because then you can make sure that it's done well. So control, yes, you're right, Antonia.
I'm going to read this lovely, lovely memory that's just come in from Charlotte. Thank you, Charlotte. I was about 12 years old when An Audience with Victoria Wood was shown on ITV, and I was in fits of laughter watching it with my mum. We loved her telling the long story joke about the makeup demonstrator and the lines about Sakharov and the makeup for a new look. My mum loved her, and so did I. Humour that we both enjoyed. Thank you so much for sharing that, Charlotte. That's just lovely.
Is Charlotte able to answer on chat whether she knew that Victoria was 6 months, or could tell whether Victoria was 6 months pregnant during An Audience with Victoria Wood?
There you go, Charlotte. There's a question for you.
It's a little question for you.
And I will get that if you come back to us on the Q&A. Usually the Q&As go that way, but that's fine bringing them the other way.
I am a journalist and interviewer, so it is my mode. I'd also love to know whoever is not feeling shy to tell. I'd love to know your favourite songs, apart from the obvious one, and sketches.
I'm this close, Jasper. This close. I know all the words. I'll take myself off that with some more questions. Elizabeth asks, how did Victoria Wood think of sentences such as, if her bum was a bungalow, she'd never get a mortgage? Did they come from observation, or did she make them up?
The rhythm of a line like that came from listening to the world around her in Lancashire. So that is rhythmically Lancastrian, that line, but other than that, it's pure Victoria. If a bum was a bungalow, yeah. I mean, if you hear it, it's poetry. It's poetry. She did used to be asked this: Do you kind of go out with a tape recorder? And Clive James used to kind of sort of joshingly accuse her of being someone who was you wouldn't want to kind of stand next to her in a supermarket trolley, because she would make a note of everything that you'd put into your trolley. But no, she when she was asked that question, she said she wrote her own stuff. She wasn't quoting people. But it's a good question.
There's another Antonia listening. Hello, great name. I am very interested in the background of Pat and Margaret. How much of that relates to her true story?
That's a really good question, the other Antonia. It's not, I mean, Victoria did talk about the fact that Pat and Margaret were really two sides of her own psyche, that Pat was the kind of the celebrity. She was interested in the side of what it felt like to be a huge celebrity. Obviously, she wasn't a monster like Pat is in the drama, but she was so it was that side of exploring that side of herself, of someone that everyone wants a piece of. And in Margaret, she explored the side of her personality, the shy person who bumbled along or could very easily have ended up living in a bedsit if it hadn't happened for her, and who bungled along at the bottom and didn't ever make it. So there were two halves of her, really. And I mean, similarly, I don't know if you can remember the drama that she wrote right at the start of her career, of her television career, Talent, which she wrote initially for the theatre, and then it was on Granada, and you can find it if you just put Victoria Wood Talent in YouTube. You can watch it. It's only an hour. That also is two women, and they would appear to be Julie and Victoria, and it's a portrait of their friendship, but actually they're really, again, a portrait of the ambitious side of Victoria, who wants to enter talent contests, and the shy side, who is not social and not confident. So she was always exploring those two sides of herself. Julie was always playing the kind of the hard-nosed, sometimes a sort of bully, all the way through from those early sketches in Wood and Walters right the way to Petula Gordino, and the ghastly actress Boadicea Beaumont, who plays Mrs. Overall, who is terribly grand. All of those characters Julie Walters could play so well, but I always saw them, particularly those early ones in Wood and Walters. It was as if Victoria was using the Julie character as a kind of instrument of self-harm, because Victoria would write about herself as this sort of fat, dumpy waste of space in those sketches, and they're very difficult to watch, I find, as a biographer.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And Charlotte's got back to us and said no, she did not know that Victoria Wood was 6 months pregnant in that.
Yeah, well, no one did.
Thank you very much, Charlotte.
No one did.
Lauren says, I've got 2 of her books called Barmy, which have some of her scripts, and I'm wondering why they don't seem to be in publication anymore. Do you know why that might be?
I mean, the short answer is no. Actually, I don't know why. I mean, maybe some of her scripts could be republished. They were brought out at the time, and they were very, her publisher's Methuen. She had a very close relationship with her publisher at Methuen, and they brought out books successively. And eventually, there was a big, sort of chunky compendium of all everything that she had published thus far, called Chunky. And so what were they called? They were called Barmy, Chunky. First one was called Up to You, Porky. And why did they go out of print? I guess Methuen didn't bring out second editions, and Victoria maybe didn't want to bring out more editions of her scripts. I actually don't know the answer. I'd be waffling at this point.
Hang on to them.
Yeah.
Hang
on to them. Because they're
very quickly for us, Jasper, because I've got 2 more questions. I'd love to fit them both in.
Yeah.
Janet and Paul ask what path her children took work-wise.
They're both in music, but very differently. Grace is an opera singer, and Henry writes, I don't want to call it pop music because it's not chart music, but he writes he writes oh God, I'm going to embarrass myself if I name the genre. But he's basically writes in the popular idiom. He's a talented composer.
So they both took that music that was in Victoria Wood's soul and passed them. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
There are a lot of beats in Henry's music. Does that help?
That helps. Antonia just says, has anyone seen My Friend Kimberly? Which I think thank you for that. Now, and Andrea's sharing a lovely thing here. It says, I own a very treasured first edition copy of Victoria Wood's songbook, Lucky Bag, and my favourite song from the book is What We Find, the main theme of which is To Live for Now. I performed it to my choir not long after Victoria died, as it seemed rather apt. Live for Now is a good mantra for us all. That's lovely, Andrea. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Yeah.
That's so
great.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And we have a question from Alice, who says, it is often said that she was a fiend for writing and then rewriting things, even as they were filmed. Were there things in the archive that you recognised as parts of or first drafts of things we saw later?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I mean, there were things that she researched. Yeah, I mean, actually, sorry, the most obvious answer to that is I don't know whether you remember that she wrote for Sky a 10-minute drama short called The Giddy Kipper, which is a beautiful film. It's not easily accessible, I don't think, but it was Victoria's directorial debut on screen. And that was actually one of the scripts I mentioned earlier that she wrote in 2008 that never came to pass. One of them was called The Giddy Kipper, and they are both quite autobiographical stories. The 10-minute short was about a little girl who has an absent mother, and I mean it feels like Victoria writing in some sense about what it was like to live a lonely life on a hill, which was the reality of her childhood. But indeed, the commission was meant to be write about something in your past. She didn't want to write directly autobiographically, but they let her write this one instead. But it was sort of lifted and Bowdlerized and crunched down from that previous script. And there are probably other instances, but I'd have to kind of scroll through my brain. We haven't got time for that.
No, we are drawing to a close. There's a lovely memory here from Antonia, who says, I went to see Acorn Antiques at the Richmond Theatre. As the lights went down, both Victoria Wood and Trevor Nunn slipped in and sat on the other side of the gangway to me.
Victoria was thrilled that Trevor came to see that, because he directed the original production of Acorn Antiques, and she felt it was too long, and so that West End run ended, and Victoria wanted to give it a second life and take it out on tour, and she just said to Trevor Nunn, do you mind if we just cut it in half and we just have half the musical? And he said, no, that's fine. And he said, do you mind if I just take your direction and do a version of that on stage? He said, no, that's fine. And when she came to see it, all of the cast knew that there was someone very special coming to see that particular performance, and they thought, oh, it's Julie Walters, but no, it was Trevor Nunn. And she was so thrilled that he gave her the nod, because, you know, to get it from him was, of course, very important. David Threlfall also was at that performance. He played the husband in Housewife 49. And
there you go. And so were you, Antonia. You were there too.
Yes.
Charlotte's written, I also loved watching Dinner Ladies. Oh, Charlotte, so did I. The character Brenda was brilliant. I cry every time Brenda finally realises that Tony loves her for being Bren. I could obviously I had to re-watch Dinner Ladies as research for this interview, and re-watching it through, just the brilliance of the observation, and the fact that it's not particularly cozy, actually. It's not particularly kind. It really hits some very raw human emotions, some universal truths. And I'm right with you there, Charlotte. That moment, it's a bit like when she realises she could say to the social worker, I don't want my mum to live with me. Boom, back of the net, Teddy Sheringham. Yeah, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. We've got 2 minutes. And I just wanted to ask you, because obviously we lost her so much too young. You know, when you're looking at what a lot of her co-stars are still doing, still achieving, growing, going on to different dramatic expressions, just brilliant actors and actresses, and she's not there. It feels like a really empty space. What do you think she'd be doing if she was still with us now?
Directing. Next question. She'd definitely be directing. There wouldn't be any. I don't think she wanted to do much. I don't think she wanted to do any more stand-up, and she didn't want really to be on screen very much anymore. She had discovered the joys of directing, which particularly in That Day We Sang, right at the end of her life, and she wanted to do more of that. The next thing was, as I've said earlier, she wanted to direct that script, Cakes on a Train, for the big screen.
That's brilliant. I mean, it's not brilliant, but it is brilliant. Because that feels so right, doesn't it, in terms of everything we knew. We are going to have to draw to a close. The time has caught up with us. We did lose Victoria far too early, but thank you, Jasper, for working so very, very hard to bring her to us so thoroughly and respectfully and openly. Really grateful to you. It's a fantastic book. I believe Cheryl has some signed book plates. And thank you, Jasper, so much for talking to me this evening. It's been an absolute joy and a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonia, and thank you to the audience for the great questions as well.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Sharon in the bookshop.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Jasper. That was absolutely fascinating, and can't wait to read it. And just so as everyone knows, we do have lots of copies at the Chorleywood Bookshop with signed plates, so signed by Jasper. So yeah, it will make an absolutely fantastic Christmas present. So and it's already in its 3rd reprint. I mean, it's doing so well already, Jasper. So congratulations, anyways.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And thank you, Antonia, for guiding us through this evening. If I can, just while I've got everybody here, just tell you, and I know you'll be really interested, our next event is with Andrew Cotter, who's written this lovely book, Mabel and Me, about his dogs. So that's on Tuesday, the 8th of December. And a nice lovely family event. We've got the lovely Rob Biddulph, you know, who did a lot of drawing with everyone during lockdown, and Draw with Rob. So we're doing another Zoom event with him on Friday the 11th of December at 4:30. So a great family time to come in from school. So 2 super events to look forward to in these dark evenings. So on that note, we'll say goodbye and thank you both again. Thank you, Jasper, and thank you, Antonia, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. And as you say, great questions. I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.